Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 BASF Put the Boot to Clubroot webinar on Clubroot Management. Thanks for joining us here this morning. I'm Shaun Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio that you can hear every day on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM. I'm going to be the moderator today. You're going to be hearing from three panel members who will be bringing their own unique knowledge and experience to the table to provide a complete picture of the Clubroot management scene. We're going to hear today from Scott Keller. He's a He's a farmer, owner-operator of Keller Farms in central Alberta. Dr. Steven Strelkov. He is a plant pathology professor at the University of Alberta. And also Leighton Blashko, who is Senior Tech Specialist or Senior Tech Service Specialist at BASF. As you can see, we have a lot of perspectives to cover in today's webinar, so let's get started. With Clubroot constantly evolving in fields across Canada, today's webinar is aimed at bringing everyone up to speed on how practices are changing to keep up with this shift. The main goal of today's webinar isn't to cure Clubroot, but to minimize its impact in canola fields across Canada by spreading knowledge on the disease. More specifically, the panel members will cover integrated pest management strategies, how Clubroot-resistant genetics fits into that, the rationale behind the evolving nomenclature, and other topics that will aid in the management and deterrence of the disease. We'd like to end the webinar today with your questions, and that's always the best part about these BASF webinars. To submit a question, just type it in the chat box, and we'll have one of our panel members answer them during the Q&A period. Also, for those of you who are certified crop advisors, you'll receive 1 CCA and 1 CCSC CEU credit for attending this webinar. Just make sure you entered your CCA number when you signed in. If you registered at an earlier date and forgot to provide your CCA number, no problem. Just be sure to contact the Ag Solutions Customer Care Center. Okay, before I hand things over to the panel members, let's examine what sparked this webinar. Clubroot is a relatively new disease to canola in Canada, with the first documented case back in 2003 near Edmonton. Since then, the disease has increased in severity and spread to canola fields across the country. Its development over the years has caused it to become a very big key disease in the canola industry. Luckily for growers who don't have it in their fields, there are steps that they can take to deter the disease. For those of you who do not have it in your fields, you're lucky. But it's important that you understand what you can do to stay ahead of it and be proactive to manage it. Clubroot is not a see and react kind of disease. Being proactive is really a key element. Okay, so let's get rolling here. Our first speaker is Scott Keller of Keller Farms. Scott will be sharing his firsthand experiences with Clubroot on his farm in central Alberta. As a former Olds College graduate and agronomist, Scott puts his knowledge of the disease to the test when he committed to farming full-time in 2013. So without any further ado, Scott Keller, you are up.
Morning, Shaun.
Morning, how's it going?
All right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah,
all
pretty
loud
good.
and clear, Scott. Yeah, good.
Okay, yeah. Looks like there's about a 5-second delay here. So, so I'm going to flip to the next slide. So as everybody can see, that's where we're located at the red dot of our farm, just south of Camrose, an hour southeast Edmonton. So I'd say right in the kind of the heart of the Clubroot country. It's north central Alberta there. Next slide, please.
So Scott, tell us a little bit about.
Go ahead, Shaun.
Yeah. Just tell us a little bit about the history of and what you've been experiencing with Clubroot in your farming career.
Yeah. So back in 2011, when I was still working as a retail agronomist and farming in the same area, we didn't have Clubroot. Right. We were a green county. There was no Clubroot around. We thought it was an Edmonton problem, and it was a long way away. And we were definitely complacent in scouting for it. And then 2 farmers brought in plants that were infected, and we had the U of A come out and confirm that that's what it was. So it was a real punch to the stomach, and a little bit embarrassing that we were that complacent for all those years, because we were well aware of Clubroot from back in 2003 and following it the whole way along, but just never thought that it was our problem. So we adopted on our farm Clubroot-resistant hybrids right away and tried to reduce our canola acres. We were probably growing canola twice in 5 years. Before that with barley and wheat as well. So we added some pulse crops to our rotation to try to get to a 1 in 3.
Okay, so Scott, keep going. Like, tell us more about this and like some of the best management practices that you've put into place.
Right. Yeah. So we went to, like I said, tried to get to that 1 in 3 to a 1 in 4. So we're trying to grow canola twice every 7 years and using resistant varieties right away. And then we also we rotate our herbicide tolerant system so we can spray out those volunteers because that's another source of the disease is those volunteer crops within the canola. So you need to be able to spray them out, and the only way of doing that is rotating herbicide systems. So we felt that was important to do, and from there it was just try to manage it. And we weren't really finding it, and as you see now on this slide, when we bumped into, we were on a plot tour on our farm, we found Clubroot on a canola variety for the first time. So we were basically, this was the last place we thought we'd ever see Clubroot, and because it was a half a, sorry, I'm not getting any of Shaun's audio anymore.
Yeah. I can hear you, Scott.
The video. Okay, I heard you there.
Yep.
So yeah, so we were on our plot tour that we hosted, and where we found these plants, it was a half a mile from any approach. It wasn't near a headland where you'd expect to see it. It wasn't volunteer canola because it had been rotated a herbicide. At the end of the day, we talking with the Canola Council, we figured that these plants were an off-type, but basically because it was so far, it wasn't in a drainage ditch or any water run, out in the middle of the field, the last place you'd expect to find your first Clubroot plants, and there they were. So my conclusion was, well, those spores were already there, so there's a good chance, even though we had been growing resistant varieties since 2012, this disease is further ahead than where we thought. So it was an eye-opener to find it there, and we knew that we had to definitely be diligent with this disease because it was surprising to find it in that spot.
So Scott, how has your management practices that you've been using to fight the disease, how has it changed over time, like in terms of selection of varieties or your rotation, fertility, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so like I said, with the rotation, it was trying to get it to a 2 and 7, so growing canola every 3rd or 4th year. So stretching that out, we were able to do that by adding more wheat and and those pulse crops like peas and faba beans. We also, like growing resistant varieties, back then there wasn't really too many choices. There was a handful of varieties, and there's definitely more to choose from today. And for myself, we try to straight cut canola, so I'm happy now that we have choices of double stacked where we can do Clubroot and pod shatter. So that's good. And as far as our fertility, it really, we're doing the same thing that we used to do. We're focusing, like the big BMPs we're focusing on is resistant varieties and stretching out a rotation. As far as all the other BMPs, we haven't done too many of them of those yet. We had an approach that we did move on a field that I thought was a high risk for Clubroot coming in from neighbors' fields in the area. But other than that, it's the rotation has been our main focus.
Okay. What about things like tillage? Like, we've had a couple, and all about this, rough harvests.
Yep.
We got ruts in the field, and so we got to smooth out those ruts. How do you manage that and trying to minimize the spread of the disease inside the field?
Yeah, that's a tough one, I guess. I have had to go out and disc ruts as well. Selective spots. We're not doing the whole field, of course. And really, those ruts are in low spots where it's muddy. That's where you're going to have clubroot. So I guess you should be mindful that, you know, there's going to be, you're moving clubroot around probably. Every time you pull the disc out, you can just expect that you're moving it around. So call it a calculated or a weighted risk. I don't, you'd want to be knocking dirt off in that case for sure, to clean the, because the disc moves a lot of dirt when you're fixing ruts. If you're lucky enough, it's dry in the fall when you're doing it, and then perhaps the disc is staying somewhat clean. But yeah, when you're discing water runs and discing sloughs and discing lots of stuff, it's going to be a risk. So I have been leaving some ruts that, you know, you probably would have normally fixed that aren't too bad. Yeah, we have to be thinking about moving clubroot around when we're pulling out the disc to fix ruts. We got to find a balance there.
Yeah, we're going to come back to Scott with more questions, my questions and yours here at the end of today's webinar. But Scott, last question: can you give us an idea of how much time you are spending in terms of going out and looking at some of those troubled spots, and when in the season?
Yeah, like we're spending. I can't put an hours on, but like you when you're driving around and you're checking your crop through potting, and those are when those spots start showing up that brown off, and it's easy to think that they're just water stress. Like last year, you know, we were wetter, so it looked like you had a lot more of these brown patches, and you go out and inspect them and pull up plants and looking for galls, and that's what we have to stay diligent at is scouting for those suspicious patches in the fields. Just to stay ahead of this disease, and basically, you know, by doing things like that, not letting it get established to large patches when you can manage it when it's small. If we're able to stay ahead of the disease in that standpoint, clubroot is not going to negatively impact our farm's profitability, in my opinion, if we can stay ahead of this disease. If we were complacent, you know, we definitely were complacent up until 2012. If we would have stayed that way, I would think clubroot would be a big problem on our farm already if we didn't do it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Scott, we're going to come back to you here at the end for the Q&A portion. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Some great experience and knowledge on this disease. Next up is Dr. Steven Strelkov. Dr. Strelkov is a plant pathology professor at the University of Alberta. His research at the U of A focuses on diseases of field crops with an emphasis on clubroot in canola. He's also a well-read individual with over 180 peer-reviewed papers to his name, so chances are you've read the name even before hearing him today. Here is Dr. Strelkov.
Hello, yeah, can you hear me all right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so next slide, please. Yeah, so thank you for the invitation to participate on this webinar. And so I was asked to give a little bit of an update on the current status of clubroot, and particularly with respect to its distribution, and also some of the pathotypes and so on. So that's kind of what I'll try to do in the next few minutes, and then hopefully answer any questions that continue. So just starting off with an update as of to the situation in 2019, at the end of the 2019 growing season. Clubroot has continued its spread. We've gone from the 12 confirmed infestations back in 2003 to over 3,300 confirmed field infestations by the fall of 2009 and fall of 2019. And as Scott mentioned, you know, these are just documented infestations where we've actually confirmed that it's there. It's probably present in many more fields, but it gives a snapshot in time of what the situation is. So in Alberta in 2019, we had 300 new confirmed cases. In those fields where we recorded the disease severity, particularly those that were surveyed directly by University of Alberta staff, we had about half the fields were mildly infested. So we're talking about a few small patches or a plant here and there that had a few galls. About 40% were moderately infested, so there was, significant patches here and there. And then only about 10% were what we'd say heavily infected, where the clubroot was quite severe and in many spots in the field. And we've seen the continuing trends of it's continued to move out through basically most of the agricultural regions of the province. In the last couple of years, they had moved into the Peace Country, and we see continued spread now into Neehill and Starland counties and more into southern Alberta. So it's quite, and of course, it's been established in central Alberta for quite a few years now. In Saskatchewan, symptoms have been confirmed in 51 fields since 2017, and that included 8 symptomatic fields, new fields that were found in 2019. So it's much less established in Alberta, but certainly increasing there. And in Manitoba, they have 35 fields with confirmed clubroot symptoms as of September 2019, and they have a lot more where they've found the molecular evidence of the pathogen, like the DNA, but haven't actually observed any symptoms. Next slide, please. So these maps, hopefully you can see them. They're not showing up so good on my screen, but it's just to give you an idea of what the distribution looks like of clubroot across the prairie provinces. So in Alberta, you see we've shifted a little bit how we prepare our maps. It's more like a gradient. The light yellow means there's few or little cases. Gray means nothing has been documented there for clubroot. And as we get more orangey and reddish, there's more severe cases. And you can see a large part of Alberta now has clubroot, and certainly it's most intense, the outbreak in central Alberta, but those former clubroot peripheral areas are getting more more and more every year and more severe. Saskatchewan, their map looks a little bit different, but essentially where you see the yellows is some of the RMs where they found clubroot. In blue, it's where they found pathogen DNA, and in Manitoba on the right-hand side, you can see red are municipalities where they found actual symptoms of clubroot. So while certainly Alberta now is the most severe for clubroot, it is becoming more and more pronounced in the other provinces as well. Next slide, please. So the other issue that's become of concern has been the occurrence of clubroot in resistant canola, or clubroot resistant canola, CR canola. And we found this in increasing number of fields beginning around 2013. And so far we found that resistance has been overcome on canola crops in Alberta and at least one field in Manitoba, but so far, to our knowledge, not in Saskatchewan. But of course, when you find clubroot in a field that's supposed to be clubroot resistant, there are potential explanations aside from the emergence of a new pathogen strain that breaks resistance. It could be off-types, as Scott was mentioning. It could be volunteers. So we do have to take samples back and evaluate them under controlled conditions in the greenhouse by testing on true seed, certified seed of the resistant varieties. And then we also do pathotyping to determine what strain it is. And unique virulence patterns are assigned a distinct pathotype designation based on this Canadian clubroot differential set, or CCD set. Next slide, please. So in terms of clubroot resistance erosion, or the increase in fields of resistance issues, we found the first 2 cases were in 2013, where there were 2 fields where there were patches of clubroot in our resistant varieties, and we were able to confirm that it was indeed new strains. And the number of cases has been increasing every year. By 2018, we had 204 fields where there were resistance issues in Alberta, and there's another 134 more cases that we identified or were sent to us in 2019, most of which are in the process of being tested right now. So we probably have somewhere in the vicinity of around 330 fields with resistance issues. Now it's a small percentage. If you think of it, about 10% of all confirmed clubroot infestations, but it is a cause for concern because resistance is such an important clubroot management tool, and it's and we certainly don't want to lose it. Next slide, please. So this is not sure it looks too. This is supposed to be a like kind of a transition GIF kind of animated map, but it wasn't working, so we had to do it this way. Hopefully you can see it. Basically, was showing that the distribution of fields with resistance issues in Alberta from 2013 to 2018. Hopefully you can see it. The little reddish, there are all supposed to be little red dots in the where resistance issues have been identified. So and most of the fields where we're seeing issues have been where the club, as we would expect, where the outbreak is right now most severe, so in central Alberta. But we've seen a few fields, for instance, in southern Alberta and as well as in the Peace Country, where there's resistance breaking strains of the pathogen. Next slide, please. So as we found these issues with resistance, we've been trying to characterize the strains or the pathotypes and how they differ and what they are to better understand the pathogen and kind of provide information for the breeders who are trying to develop new varieties with new resistance. So prior to 2013, we knew of 5 unique pathotypes in Canada, and these were characterized in a system called Williams differentials, which we kind of replaced with this Canadian Clubroot differential set. So from 2013 to 2016, we found a total of 17 pathotypes identified on this Canadian Clubroot differential set, and this included the original 5 pathotypes from that we knew of before. And then there were 6 additional pathotypes that we found basically just under laboratory conditions. So basically these were extremely rare strains that we could not, we didn't see them in the field, but we could purify them out of material we were getting from farmers' fields. And finally, in the last 2 years, 2018, 2019, we found 13 additional new pathotypes. Can you, next, please? So we have a total of 36 pathotypes identified in Canada with the Canadian Clubroot differential set. Now, only about half of those actually can break resistance or overcome resistance. We have 19 of 36 can break the resistance. Next slide, please. But you see, it's a very large number of pathotypes, but in reality, only a few pathotypes are common or widely distributed. Next slide. So while we found so many different pathotypes, really the predominant pathotypes continue to be just a few of them. One called pathotype 3A and another one 3D. These both break resistance. And we also find a lot of the old pathotype 3, or what we now call 3H, which was the pathotype that was predominant before Clubroot resistance was introduced into Canada, onto the prairies. So that one's still around, particularly in fields where there's a short history of growing resistant varieties. Most of the other new pathotypes are confined to specific areas or counties, or identified only from single spore isolates. So yeah, and I should mention, yeah, I see it popped up here. In Manitoba, the one resistance breaking pathotype that's been found is pathotype 3A. I think it was in the rural municipality of Pembina. So this 3A, 3D, and 3H are most common, but there's a lot of other pathotypes there, but many of these are very geographically restricted, may occur in just a few fields or a cluster of fields. Next slide, please. So I don't want to take up too much time because I guess leave time for discussion, but so in terms of conclusions or summary, the clubroot has continued to spread, and certainly areas that were formerly kind of, we thought of them as peripheral clubroot areas or free of clubroot are now, certainly one has to assume that clubroot is there, and it has been confirmed in many of those regions. Probably the biggest challenge we're facing right now in terms of clubroot management is the emergence of new pathotypes that can overcome the resistance. And the reality is, with so many new pathotypes, it'll be impossible to breed against all of them. But I think breeders will have to make strategic decisions. really by focusing on the predominant pathotypes and the most aggressive pathotypes, with the recognition that genetics may not be an option in some farms with very unique or rare pathotypes. And I think that's all I had, so thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Strelkov. Really, really appreciate it. We're going to get to our next presenter. It is Leighton Blashko. He is a senior tech service specialist at BASF, where he provides agronomic training and sales support for seed treatments, herbicides, fungicides, and Invigor hybrid canola. His work also takes him into the field, where he works with farmers on large-scale replicated demonstration plots with crop protection products and Invigor canola traits. I'll now hand things over to Leighton. You're up.
All right, thanks so much, Shaun. Yeah, if we can just go to the slides now, I'm just going to talk about some of the best management practices that deal with Clubroot, or how to manage Clubroot on your farm. So first of all, I mean, we would say that the best offense is a strong defense. So we know that it's a serious yield robber if you have it in your field. You need to ensure that you're using an IPM, or integrated pest management approach, as you want to confront it. And then, only using a hybrid with a C or Clubroot resistant hybrids is only one tool. It's certainly not, genetics are certainly not going to solve this problem. We're always playing catch up with the disease. As Dr. Strelkov had mentioned, there's, things are evolving and changing over time. And, we want to, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of a flow chart as to how we at BASF see the Invigor canola hybrids with the C in their name fitting in your operation. Next slide, please. So first of all, I wanted to acknowledge, a lot of the images and some of the information here is we worked really closely with the Canola Council of Canada. Their Clubroot management video is an excellent resource. As well, I was able to attend the International Clubroot Workshop a couple of summers ago, and that was an awesome resource. And there was, a lot of really good messaging around Clubroot. So go ahead, next slide. The best management practices that I wanted to cover, basically, if you looked at this one image, there's seven items here that I wanted to cover. And, going through all of these, if you're looking at Clubroot, you want to look at it by looking at all of these different things and make sure that all of those are part of your plan. Because for us, sustainability of the canola industry is paramount, for sure, and that's what drives our position on how to best manage Clubroot. We don't want a one-hit wonder or just sell a bag of seed or a certain hybrid and then have something not be, useful in the future. So we want to make sure that, sustainability is paramount when we're looking at things. Next slide. So the first strategy, I think it was mentioned, and I'll just touch on it, is that crop rotation is key. And, we want to ensure that you allow at least 2 years between host crops. When Clubroot first came onto the scene in Western Canada, there was a lot of, uncertainty and fear, and some of the international studies and information suggested that it might be 7 years or 20 years before you'd be able to grow between canola crops. That just was not palatable. We saw as the Clubroot resistant genetics came onto the scene, growers were able to utilize them. They were introduced, they weren't immediately available across all systems. But then research then showed that if instead of asking growers to go to, say, a 4-year rotation even, that maybe a 3-crop rotation or allowing 2 years between canola would be sufficient. And it's just about as good in terms of the viability of the resting spores as a 3-year break. So that made things a lot more palatable for growers out there. Next slide. So the key thing too is to reduce the selection pressure for Clubroot pathotypes. You really want to minimize the explosion or the amount of spores that are growing in your fields. So that is why we would say you want to deploy resistant hybrids as soon as there's Clubroot in the area. Now I've got a chart at the end, a bit of a new flow chart, and we'll also be sending it out after this presentation to just show people so that they can kind of make a decision as to how do they choose, A, if a Clubroot resistant hybrid is for them, and then B, whether they should choose one particular hybrid versus another one. Next slide. Another thing, of course, we mentioned, Scott mentioned scouting. And maybe some people think, okay, I'm scouting properly. I'm going to look at the driveway and I'm kind of pulling out a few plants, 5 or 6 plants. But really, 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 the one thing I can't stress enough is how diligent you have to be at looking for the pathogen. It's primarily in field entrances is where you'd find it first. Also low areas because it follows the moving any water. And then also you need to look at random areas. And when do you look? You look as harvest approaches, and you want to pull the plants or the stubble. And when I say looking for lots of plants, I'm saying 100 or more plants. Really, when we were out with the University of Alberta and the Canola Council scouting, it really opened my eyes to exactly how many plants you got to look at. Next slide. The other thing that came out of the International Clubroot working workshop a couple of years ago was this idea around patch management. It was really never ever talked about, and basically it comes down to the fact that if you see small patches in your field with clubroot, you want to basically not farm through those areas. You want to hand pull those infected plants, grass that area or maybe 2 times the size of that area, and farm around it for a number of years. Now, when people first heard about this idea of pulling out, plants from maybe something the size of a vehicle or an acre even, they thought, are you absolutely crazy? This is a silly idea. But if you can think about it, it really comes down to reducing the spore load. And we know that there's so many billions of spores in each plant that it's certainly worth your while. Next slide. The key thing, though, is that we want to ensure that you do proper disposal. So either bag them and put them in a landfill, or else you need to burn them. I know it's difficult to burn green matter sometimes, and you certainly want to ideally pull all those plants when they still have those more fresh galls on them rather than the broken down, sort of rotted galls that you might see on older infections. Next slide. And again, I want to just talk to the fact that each infected plant can have about 16 billion spores. That's an amazing number. It's to think about that in one plant, and if you can pull those plants out, you're going to be reducing your inoculum load by just oodles and oodles. So I think it's a really good strategy. And the key thing too is that I want to make it clear that when you have a gall on a plant, it's primarily one pathotype, but it's always a mixed population. So we can't always say that, oh, I've got this particular pathotype or that particular pathotype. You may have the majority one, but there certainly are other pathotypes. Next slide. One thing, I think there we are. So another thing that I would say to consider as far as a soil amendment is to consider liming. The research is still ongoing, but it is somewhat promising. And really increasing your pH to 7.3 is something that they're looking at as a potential option. I mean, I'm not an expert at this particular process, but it is something that there's research going on, and it does look promising. Next slide. And I think the last strategy is to control your weeds and volunteer canola. We often think of other weeds, and you don't really realize how related they are. So things like stinkweed, flicksweed, shepherd's purse, mustard, and then, of course, volunteer canola need to be controlled. And it's not only in that year when you're growing canola, but also in every other year. Because just because you're changing a crop, you've got volunteers and you've got those weeds, they can become hosts, of course, even when it's not the even when it's not the canola year. Next slide. The one thing you want to also think about is maybe a biosecurity protocol and sanitation. If you want to keep your boots, your tools, your ATVs, your equipment clean, anything you can do. Maybe it's as simple as knocking off some of the mud off your openers when you're finished up with a seeder. Of course, a pressure washer or cleaning it better would be a significantly better improvement. Other things that you want to use for your tools or for anything that's moving through, if you could, is to use bleach, and it's a 2% solution is what's recommended. So most household bleach is around 5% solution. So kind of a 1-to-1 ratio would get you at about that 2% solution. But then recent research suggests that something probably less harmful on your clothing or on metal is spray-nine. And the recent research just from this last summer suggested it's very similar activity to bleach. So I think that was a good revelation, or a good amount of research that was done to find that one out. Next slide. So there's a number of useful resources on Clubroot, and this is just one of them. This is really a go-to place where I go. It's the Canola Encyclopedia, or clubroot.ca, and it's a great resource for any information on Clubroot. Next slide. Now I just want to, for the last final two slides here, just talk a little bit about Invigor hybrid Clubroot positioning. So we say that all Invigor Clubroot resistant hybrids have been developed to be resistant to the most predominant pathotypes found in Western Canada at the time of registration. We've never put on letters or numbers, because as you've seen, the numbers and letters and numbers of pathotypes is a moving target all the time. Our first generation Clubroot resistant hybrids are Invigor L345PC, Invigor L352C, Invigor LR, Invigor Choice LR344PC, Invigor L241C, Invigor L255PC, and Invigor Health L258HPC. Then we would say that second generation Clubroot hybrids are Invigor L234PC. So we have a strategy where we would say that you want to deploy first generation Clubroot resistant hybrids as your first line of defense. And then once you've grown them 2 or more times, or if you found symptoms in your field of Clubroot, then you would switch to the second generation Clubroot resistant hybrids. And that the only one we have at the current time is Invigor L234PC. So next slide. I know this is a really busy slide, and we're going to be sending it out, but hopefully, it's a new thing that we've just produced, is a method of selecting the right Clubroot resistance option for your Invigor hybrid canola. And basically it's a flow chart that you work through, and then it says whether you should consider, exactly what you should consider for your farm. So those are the strategies I had, Shaun, and I think that would be about it for now.
Okay. Awesome. Oh, Leighton, can you hear me? Okay,
yes.
Good. Okay, so we're going to get to the Q&A portion of the program here. Thanks a lot for that presentation, Leighton. Now, you're going to see a Q&A box that comes up. Enter your questions and also your location. If you could, that'd be great, just to give the panel members a context of where you are from. All 3 of our panelists are here for the Q&A session. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that BASF is actually the sponsor of our canola school at realagriculture.com. So you can go to canolaschool.com and get some great content dedicated to canola agronomy. Actually, Leighton and I just did a video the other day talking about Clubroot. Imagine that. Good stuff. Okay, let's get to the Q&A portion here. First of all, Leighton, is your concern about Clubroot the same as it was 2 to 3 years ago, or how do you look at the disease from your standpoint, attitude-wise?
Well, I would say that there's certainly a heightened awareness. At one time it used to be kind of a central or north central Alberta problem. And then it slowly moved, the leading edge of it's moved out across Western Canada for sure. And there is even Clubroot in Eastern Canada where they do grow a small amount of canola too. But so there's a heightened awareness in these new areas. But even in the areas where the Clubroot has been around for quite a while, we know that we're already, as Stephen had mentioned, seeing a bit of a pathogen shift, where we're needing to consider not only using all those strategies that I said, but also deciding about which genetics you want to use to combat from a resistance standpoint. So, but certainly we are playing catch up. We're always playing catch up. The genetics are not going to solve the problem. You need certainly to use an integrated approach.
Yeah, good stuff. I've got a question here from Edgar. He said, I'll direct it to Dr. Strelkov. What is the threshold of spore load in the soil when Clubroot symptoms will appear?
Okay, there's not a fixed number, but under field conditions, typically we would say it would take about 100,000 spores per gram of soil, so about a pea-sized piece of soil, 100,000 spores per gram of soil to get fairly decent symptoms that you can see some galling and so on. You could probably get, if the conditions are right, you could probably go lower than that, but typically that would be roughly the threshold we look at.
So, Dr. Strelkov, are you a believer that we should have some of these spore detection devices in our fields? Like, one of them is like that Spornado. Do you think that's a good idea to kind of understand the spore load in the field?
Tools like the Spornado and those type of catchers traps would not be too effective because of the fact that the resting spores are mainly in the soil. So we might expect a little bit in wind-blown dust and so on, but really stuff like the Spornado will be much more useful for sclerotinia that produces lots of airborne spores. For clubroot, we would really have to be actually doing soil testing to get accurate numbers of an accurate assessment of the spore load.
Yeah, good stuff. Scott, there's so much in the news right now about testing as it applies to COVID-19, but in terms of Clubroot, do you think we're doing enough testing to understand how much Clubroot is actually out there?
Testing as far as scouting fields as opposed to sending soil samples to labs?
Yeah, either.
Well, I think the jury's still out on the sending soil tests to labs and how you can just get a number that doesn't mean a whole lot because Clubroot can just, the amount of spores can change from here to 6 feet away quite quickly. So it might give you a false sense of security. But yeah, we have not done a good job of scouting as an industry, as farmers, as agronomists, as retailers, all the way through the whole chain. We just haven't, because Clubroot keeps proving that it's farther and farther ahead than where we thought it was. It's amazing how quick we've seen, and Dr. Strelkov predicted it, that the resistance would break down when we throw resistant varieties into infested fields. So yeah, scouting, we've done a poor job in my opinion. We need to be diligent and do more, like Leighton talked about, doing like 100 plants. Like, you never thought that you need to pull that many plants just to get a good sense of how bad the disease is, or to even find that first couple of plants that have it. But yeah, we need to do a better job in my opinion. But I think more importantly, we need to be farming that our decisions, our management decisions, need to reflect that even if we haven't found Clubroot yet, that we're going to eventually. And so we need to be farming as if we have the disease already, even if we haven't found it.
So on that note, Leighton, I want you to clear up a little bit of confusion here. I got a couple questions. Are you suggesting if I don't have Clubroot in my fields, should I be planting a Clubroot variety or not?
Well, that's certainly, hopefully that's something that our flowchart can help sort out, because that's one of the questions we definitely get. Now, up until, in the past, last couple of years, and even into this year, certainly, there has not been enough Clubroot resistant seed in Western Canada to go across in the entire western canola landscape. So, it certainly is a priority to have it in areas where you have Clubroot. But if you're starting to find it in your area, or what the industry said in the community, we would certainly say that's a time that you should deploy it, for sure. We would say that you should deploy it once you start to, it starts to come into your area.
Question here from Dustin, who is from the Saskatoon area. What are the chances of spreading Clubroot on your boots? Scott, do you wear disposable booties on your farm?
No, I don't do anything like that. Really, where I try to limit soil movement is scraping the dirt off of any, like the seeding equipment. But I haven't disinfected anything yet. I think it's more important to keep that rotation to a 1 in 3. And then if I do bring Clubroot in, or wherever Clubroot is when I move it, it's not going to get established with that rotation. Like, that rotation's really the foundation of all the other BMPs. They don't really work without having that rotation off the start. So that's what's doing the heavy lifting. So yeah, no, I haven't done anything as far as leaching equipment down as I go in and out of the fields and wearing booties when I go from field to field.
Comment from Keith Gabbert with the Canola Council. Comment, when it fits, lime looks like it could reduce gall formation by at least 50%, so it's another useful tool. 7.3 pH is likely a full point higher, however, than we would have as a target for fixing acid soils. Bringing acid soils up to 6.5, for example, should capture all other agronomic benefits in terms of yield improvement and fertilizer availability. Leighton, on this question about, and thanks for that, Keith, on this question of lime, how much do you have any input on how much do I apply and the when of that?
Well, I'll probably, like I said when I was speaking, I'm really not the expert on liming. I think out of Dr. Strelkov's lab, there's some master's students working on this, and maybe he can speak to that. I'm not sure. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm certainly
Dr. Strelkov, can you help us out with this lime question?
Yeah, so can you repeat the question again, just on the...
Yeah, so I read Keith's comment about using lime. Do you have any insight? Because a lot of farmers in Western Canada haven't been using lime like this. How much do you apply and when? Do you have any insight on that?
Okay, yeah, no, that's, yeah, Keith is right that lime has the potential, and certainly we do have a couple of students, graduate students, that are doing some work on liming. The tricky part is not so much necessarily how much to to set a set rate to apply, but how much that needs to be applied in a certain soil to bring up to a target pH. And certainly in terms of clubroot management, a 7.2 is typically thought of as being pH of 7.2 is typically thought as being a good number to get significant reductions in clubroot. But you can see declines in the severity even at below 7. A little bit higher than acidic is certainly good. I guess right now we're still in the research phase, so it's hard to make a strong recommendation. This is how much you need to apply, and this is when you should to apply it. The other thing we found with lime is that there's a lot of variability in terms of the results. So sometimes we get very good control, but it's influenced a lot by the interval between when the lime was applied and the crop was planted, and also sometimes by weather and how much rain was received. So it's still a little bit of a moving target, but we're hoping with this research that's underway now, we should have some more solid recommendations in the next year or two.
So as Keith suggests, do you see lime being more of a patch management tool than, say, spreading it across the whole field?
Yeah, I do see it as a patch management where maybe there's a few acres in a field that are heavily infested, and the liming is more feasible. The other thing I also see as almost as a supplement to resistance. So I do think lime has potential to be useful, but I think genetic resistance will tend to be the most important and most effective tool. But strategies like liming and longer rotations are very effective at potentially making that resistance more durable, in helping the resistance along, so we don't have these situations where we're having the very quick development of resistance-breaking pathogens.
Okay, Dr. Strelkov, maybe we'll stay with you here. Mitchell puts in a question, says, is there new research following up on the research done back from the 50s that showed having calcium, boron, and potassium at ideal balances would stop clubroot or at least minimize it? Is there, what's your thoughts on that?
Certainly, calcium and boron in particular have been shown to help control clubroot. The difficulties, and there has been some studies continuing on this, including with Agriculture Canada and even some stuff out of Ontario, looking at the impact. The tricky part has been translating that knowledge into how you apply in the field and at what rates, and making good recommendations that will provide effective control. And again, it goes back to the issue of spore loads, because once things like calcium and boron and even lime can help to reduce clubroot, but but it depends a lot on what the initial spore load is. So if you have a very high spore load to begin with, so for instance, because of short rotation, all these tools become less effective simply because there's just so much clubroot there. When you're looking at a mild infestation, then you can start to have more significant effect of these other approaches. But again, for calcium boron, I don't think there's any set recommendations right now. There is some revival of that research, but no hard numbers right now.
Hey, Scott, are you using aerial imagery at all to identify patches in the field?
No, we're not doing anything like that. It's eyes from the road, and when you're in the sprayer, and because if we swathed, that would be the other time that you'd be scouting for the disease. But it's you're trying to go to spots where you think the clubroot might be on a water run or near the approaches. Like at least those are easily accessible. You can't be walking through 7-foot high canola out into the middle of the field to look there, and you wouldn't necessarily expect to find it there. But yeah, you're looking at patches that show premature ripening. That's what you see from the road, and you walk out to them and you investigate those plants by pulling up the roots.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead, Leighton.
Shaun, I was just going to add to that. I mean, if you were wanting to use aerial imagery for that, the best time certainly would be at about the time that you're going to see some color differences in canola. So when those plants start to poke out, so the time we start to see sclerotinia plants, patches or areas in a field show up, that would be about the time that you would want to start looking with aerial imagery for clubroot as well, because those plants, that premature ripening, they do start to show up about that time. So close to when you would normally be swathing, if you were swathing, or when you're starting to scout at about that time of the year in the fall.
But Leighton, what am I looking for? Like when I do that aerial imagery, that all sounds great. We got the right time, but what am I looking for?
Well, I think just like anything, having a ground, make sure that you're ground truthing what you're seeing in an image is going to be important. So like Scott mentioned, eyes and boots on the ground are important. So if you're looking with if you're visually assessing a field, you're walking into that field, you're looking for plants, first of all, that may see premature wilting or premature ripening. But sometimes if you're early enough, just pulling the plants out to look at the roots is going to be a telltale. So once you've already seen them wilting or premature ripening, you've got a pretty severe infection on that particular plant. So, but what, the telltale would be to look at the roots and see those great big galls. They're fresh, kind of a lighter color versus maybe more of a sawdust or rotten color, a rotten brown, darker brown color as you get later and as those galls start to deteriorate. So if you're looking at it for, what do you want to look at for aerial imagery? Probably just looking for different colored patches than what normal canola, healthy canola would look like.
Hey, question for Dr. Strelkov from Doug. Is there a risk to using clubroot genetics in an area where clubroot is not believed to be present?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because there's been some disagreement between, let's say, us as Canadians from North America versus the Europeans. The Europeans always suggest not to grow resistant varieties if there's no history of clubroot. And they say that to guard resistance, but from my perspective, and I think most of the industry and Canola Council is in agreement, that I think the risk is actually fairly low of growing a resistant variety if there's no clubroot, because the resistance, it selects for new pathotypes based on an existing population of the pathogen. So if you're growing a resistant variety and there's no clubroot in that field, it's not going to harm the genetics in any way, because it's not acting against any pathogen population. And there might be some benefit in the sense that if, by chance, some clubroot does get introduced, maybe in a clump of soil and so on, the first host that it'll find is a resistant variety. So I think it would reduce the chances that the clubroot would get established. So I think there's really not much risk to growing a resistant variety in a field where there's no clubroot, and there might be some benefits to it. That's that's my opinion.
Okay, so Leighton, why isn't BASF labeling their resistance mechanisms then?
Well, I think the information out there today is that we certainly we do label, like I talked about, first generation versus second generation in our hybrids, but there really isn't enough diversity in the resistance genes yet for this approach to be truly effective. Perhaps in the future that would be the strategy, but not today. I know the pathology subcommittee on the canola variety registration committee has discussed this, but that this is where this information, that there just isn't enough diversity yet for us to do this. So hopefully we're going to move that way in the future.
What about rotating genetics? Is that a good approach to managing clubroot on the farm? What do you suggest there?
Yeah, in a perfect world, if you had full knowledge of the pathotype that was in every, in your field or in all areas of your field, that could be a strategy if it was coupled with, as I mentioned, diverse genetic resistance. So then that could work, but unfortunately, we're just not at that point yet in the industry. So that's why we suggest utilizing first generation for 2 cycles, or until you see symptoms, but before you would switch to the second generation.
Okay. So, Leighton, let's continue on that. We heard Dr. Strelkov talk about, there's really limited risk to planting a Clubroot variety where there's no clubroot. Are we going to be in a situation where we have 20 to 22 million acres in Western Canada of canola and they're all clubroot varieties? Is that what the future looks like?
I think so. Currently today there still are, significant acres of canola hybrids that are not clubroot resistant. That's moving pretty quickly. Year after year, it's getting more and more and more. But even, in our own portfolio, we still have some hybrids that are not clubroot resistant. We're making a movement, making a shift. Our breeders are working, vigorously toward this. But think about it, that a lot of this material that's coming out last year or even this year might have been 10 years ago when those research plans were put into place and those breeding efforts started. So that's why we couldn't shift as quickly, to be there today. But I think certainly for the future, we are definitely moving to the place where, all of our hybrids will be clubroot resistant.
Okay, that is all the time we have for today's webinar. Appreciate everybody coming and joining in today under the circumstances of being at home and not being able to go out. Best of luck to everybody this growing season. We're glad you enjoyed the webinar today and want to extend a thank you to everybody that put in questions for today's experts. We'd also like to offer our thanks to the guests for sharing their knowledge, experience, and expertise on Clubroot. We hope you found the presentations informative. Our goal is to provide you with information that helps move your operation forward. I'd like to hear what you thought of today's webinar and would appreciate if you could take a minute to answer the brief survey question you'll see when you exit today's webinar. And once again, for those of you who are certified crop advisors, you are eligible to receive 1 CCA and 1 CCSC CEU credit for attending this webinar, as long as you entered your CCA number when you signed in. If you registered at an earlier date and forgot to provide your CCA number, please contact Ag Solutions Customer Care. To learn more about Clubroot and how to manage it, you can visit agsolutions.ca/webinar. An online recording of this entire webinar, including the presentation slides, will soon be available there. You can also go to canolaschool.com. For more information on Clubroot, subscribe to the BASF e-newsletter for any additional questions that weren't answered today. Talk to your trusted BASF sales representative or call Ag Solutions Customer Care at 877-371-2273 to learn more. Thanks again for attending, everybody. We wish you all the best in the coming season. Good luck seeding and stay safe.